And I'll bring in the attendees on Zoom. I have my computer up.
Excellent. Thank you. I made you a co-host.
Thank you.
Senator Cooper.
Here.
We are live.
And I'll bring in the attendees on Zoom.
Senator Cooper.
Here.
Senator French.
Here.
Senator Kolb.
Present.
Senator Cost.
Here.
Chairman Nethercott.
Here. All right. Well, again, now that we're live, good afternoon. Welcome to Senate Judiciary, members of the public, those with us here today. Today is the last day for bills to come out of committees and the last day for them to be introduced into committee of the whole. So the last moments of the final work of this session that has been grueling, but we are committed to moving through these bills that were assigned to us. So with that, we will pick up with where we left off from last week, which is House Bill 236, firearms transactions, financial discrimination. And as members of the public and the committee may recall, we spoke with the sponsor. He presented his bill and we took public testimony, and we heard primarily from the Banking Commission, who identified some concerns that they found in the bill. And we heard from additional stakeholders that made a commitment to work on the bill. And so we laid it over till today, allowing for those amendments and consensus to be reached to make the bill better. So we look forward to hearing about those. Representative Washut, would you like to come forward and talk about some of the work that's been done?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since we last met, an amendment has been proposed and you have an electronic copy of it. I'm in agreement with that amendment. I think it makes the bill better and encourage the committee to endorse it.
Thank you, Representative Washut. With that, I'm going to call on Mr. Cole to explain the amendment. And Ms. Eatman, do you have a copy of that amendment? We'll get it emailed to you right now, and we're going to get you a hard copy as well. Okay?
So
We'll get it for you. All right, Mr. Cole, if you would introduce yourself to the committee, that'd be wonderful.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you very much. My name is Nephi Cole. That's Nephi-Cole. I'm the Director of Government Relations and State Affairs for the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We are the Firearms Trade Association of America. We represent 9,000 companies. In Wyoming, that's about 1,700 jobs, about $300 million worth of economic income to the state of Wyoming direct related to our businesses. Nationally, we're about a $63 billion industry. We represent all of the professional side of the firearms folks, everybody from Winchester to Magpul to Beretta to Shields to Sportsman's Warehouse to Cabela's. That's our membership. We also own SHOT Show. Most people are aware of us from SHOT Show. So, Madam Chairman, we were visited with by the Banking Commissioner, had an opportunity to visit with him, and he expressed some concerns about a few of the definitions in the bill. We spent hours with him on Monday to try and find the language that he thought would assuage his concerns. And he shared that on the bill. And I apologize, my copy, I don't have the page numbers on them, but the First Amendment is in section 13-10-301 D triple I. And it's basically changing the definition of financial institutions so that it references the definitions in Wyoming statute. And so the proposed change is one that would strike the second part of line 2 all the way through the primary section of line 5 and replace that with, so the new reading would be financial institution means a financial institution as defined in Wyoming statute 13-1-101A9. And then there's a comma, and then it leaves the words payment processor or, and then it adds National Banking Association as defined in 12 U.S. Code 221. So that's the first suggested amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Please proceed.
Madam Chair, the second suggested amendment.
Kevin, how's your 6?
The second suggested amendment is in 13-10-302, unlawful discrimination against a firearms entity exception. And so this is the section of the bill that clearly outlines that banks can in fact deny services, any service from a financial institution to someone for any legitimate business reason. And so in this section, line 17, it says directive by, and then it strikes regulator and inserts, this would be the insertion, the state banking commissioner or bank supervisory agency as defined in Wyoming statute 13-2-801 A3. And so that would be the second one. And Madam Chair, is it appropriate for me to share some additional testimony?
You certainly can, yes.
So Madam Chair, I talked about who we represent. And I wanted to thank the committee, first of all, for hearing this bill, as well as, we are joined by some fantastic Wyoming businesses here today that we literally think are cream of the crop and top notch in the financial institution world. This proposal is currently being considered in several additional states, and at least 10. In addition to that, it's the law in Georgia. 22 senators have signed on to a national effort to make this the law of the land. And there was a rule to fix this issue with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency that was scrapped by the Biden administration when they entered office. So we wouldn't be before you if that was not the case. We believe this legislation is needed and will be effective. We appreciate the opportunity to interact with those who have shared their thoughts and concerns on this proposal recently, as recently as right before this committee meeting, when we had an opportunity to visit with, again, some great financial institutions. However, everyone with whom I have had this discussion acknowledges this fact. Concerns with this bill are speculative, but the harm to our industry that is occurring right now is real. That is not denied by anyone. Wyoming businesses, large and small, testified and will testify in this committee meeting today on behalf of this bill. Their stories are real. They are not what ifs. The dual banking system certainly creates complications that have been noted today and will be noted again on implementing rules that govern fairness and guarantee fairness in banking. However, we believe this proposal starts addressing discrimination at both the state and national level, as well as with payment processors. We do not make the claim that state banks in this state, this is not an issue. Our local banks are fantastic. The pressures that they face, these issues are not born here in Wyoming. They come at us from outside of our borders. This bill simply states that in Wyoming, if a financial institution is defined, is discriminating as described, then and only then could an aggrieved party seek a civil action in a court of competent jurisdiction. Perhaps most importantly, and more importantly, the Attorney General, this is the language in the bill, shall submit to the governor the name of any violating institution as defined, regardless of the charter. And that request then can be made that the state would terminate business relationships with the same if it is found that that is an issue. Opponents of this bill will say that this is unnecessary and it won't do anything. If they're here testifying against it, it should be clear that is not the case. Alternately, an argument will be made that it does too much. It affects discretion. We don't believe that to be true. The same sets of criteria that can be used to measure our companies as financially worthy, those same criteria that you use on any other companies can be used on ours. Financial institutions, they're going to say they're just a business. They're just like every other Main Street business. It's not true. They are different. They are highly regulated. We recognize that, like the firearms industry is. They operate under numerous rules and regulations, and they're going to talk about that. They're backed, though, remember, by public money to ensure their solvency. They are the gatekeepers of the economy. They are necessarily concentrated. However, this allows a very small number of corporations to effectively deny all access to an essential service if they collectively make decisions. That is the case that is happening in this country. Activists are pushing them to make decisions to harm us. CNBC author and New York Times columnist Andrew Sorkin postulated, what if the finance industry Credit card companies like Visa, MasterCard, and American Express, credit card companies like credit card processors like First Data, and banks like JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo were to effectively set new rules for the sales of guns in America. Collectively, they have more leverage over the gun industry than any lawmaker. We agree. We can tell you what would happen because it is happening to us right now. We're being forced from business. This is a good bill. These concerns are not speculative. The harm is real. We urge you to pass House Bill 236.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Any questions for Mr. Cole? Senator French.
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Cole, on page 6, line 21, is your organization good with that language? The Attorney General may file a civil action or versus shall?
We are. We think
Okay.
it's appropriate to give that discretion to regulators and to the Attorney General's office. We think that is appropriate. And we think that that honestly is one of the reasons we feel like some of the concerns with this are unwarranted, because we do believe that this bill leaves both discretion to financial institutions as well as to regulators and the Attorney General's office.
Any additional questions for Mr. Cole? All right, seeing none. Mr. Cole, we are going to go now to Commissioner Faulkner, who I know worked with you on the amendment. So we're kind of taking testimony a little discombobulated here, but as mentioned, a lot of work has gone into the amendment, I believe, with the stakeholders. And so I think Commissioner Faulkner from the Banking Commission will provide us some feedback concerning those amendments. Welcome back, Commissioner Faulkner. Good to see you.
Madam Chair, committee members, Albert Faulkner, Banking Commissioner, Division of Banking. Apologize, I'm not there in person, had some extenuating circumstances, took me out of the state, but appreciate being able to enjoy what technology affords us to testify remotely when needed. Yeah, I think the concerns that we had is as Mr. Cole noted, and I think everyone probably there in the room understands that, yes, banking regulation is very complicated. There is a dual banking system, and so we've got to make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences or discrepancies or things within the various definitions throughout the same statute that could cause confusion. So I believe that we have worked through those. What we provided in speaking with Mr. Cole, and I think the committee has before them, are some clarity, things that provide certainty within the definition, what is the intent and who the intended individuals or businesses are, and is consistent with the language. I would note, and again, Mr. Cole highlighted it, that we do have a dual banking system, and so our role within the state of Wyoming is just that. It only it was within the borders of the state of what we can enforce, and so that is the 25 of the 30 banks that are domiciled in Wyoming is all that we have supervisory authority over. And just wanted to note that there is a federal component to that. We have a federal partner that we work with, the Fed and the FDIC. But as far as the addition of national banks to the definition, again, doesn't fall within our supervisory authority, but we don't object to it. It's just something that we would not be able to enforce. But other than that, I'd stand for any questions that the committee might have for us.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions for the commissioner? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Commissioner Faulkner. Appreciate hearing from you. For those of you who are online and on Zoom, if you're going to testify on this bill, you need to raise your hand now. Even if you're just thinking about testifying on the bill, I want you to raise your hand now. If you don't raise your hand now, I will not let you speak on the bill if you don't raise your hand now. All right, welcome, Mr. Larson. If you could start your video. Mr. Larson, if you could start your video. With that, we'll wait for Mr. Larson. Perhaps he's having technical issues. We'll go to Mr. Keen. Lawrence Keene. If you
Thank you,
could,
Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Lawrence Keene. I'm the Senior Vice President for Government and Public Affairs for the National Shooting Sports Foundation. And I just want to echo Mr. Cole's comments in support of the bill. This is a very real issue for our industry. There's not a week that goes by that I am not contacted by some member of industry who has been denied banking services by a bank simply because they are involved in the lawful commerce of firearms and ammunition products, which is constitutionally protected. The bill seeks to address this issue. I'm glad that we were able to work out amendments to address concerns of the banking community. And I want to stress, it's very important, this legislation in no way compels any bank to lend to a business in the firearms industry that is not otherwise creditworthy. It simply addresses denial of banking services simply because they're involved in the firearms industry. And so for that reason, this bill is very important. And as Mr. Cole mentioned, there is federal legislation been introduced by Senator Kramer from North Dakota that has 32 co-sponsors in the Senate, including both members of the Wyoming delegation in the Senate are supporting the bill. So this is a very real issue for us, and this bill will help to address those concerns. And we urge your support for passage. Thank you.
all right, thank you, Mr. Keene. Questions for Mr. Keene? All right, seeing none. Mr. Keene, we appreciate hearing from you and taking the time to be here with us today. With that, is there any additional public comment online in the waiting room? If so, if you could please raise your hand. Mr. Larson, we still have you in the room, but if you could start your video whenever you're ready. If not, we're going to go to public comment here live in the room.
Yeah, it won't, it doesn't give me the option to do video for whatever reason. There's only
If you could introduce yourself to the committee.
My name is Chad Larson. I'm the president of Stag Arms. We're a firearms manufacturer that's located in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Welcome, Mr. Larson. Appreciate you being here and appreciate your business in Cheyenne and Wyoming. If you could give us some testimony on the bill, that'd be helpful.
Yep, absolutely. So as a firearms manufacturer, the discrimination against our industry is a real thing. It's a real threat towards firearms manufacturers. Having been in the industry for a while and being involved with a couple of different companies that are trying to go through growth and expand, it's not easy to find a bank, to find a financial institution that will allow us to grow as big as we can. So it takes time to shop for banks. It takes time to find one that'll actually do business with firearms manufacturers. It's the same with payment processors as well. Some of the largest payment processors out there will absolutely refuse to do business with firearms manufacturers and gun shops. So as we continue to grow and expand in Wyoming, it's a real concern that I have for the continued growth of our company, and has the possibility to hamper our growth if we do come across financial institutions that are not willing to do business with us. So,
Mr. Larson, thank you. Hopefully you'll hear some great news that 25 of the 30 banks in Wyoming would be probably very happy to have your business.
absolutely.
Larson, I encourage you to bank locally. All right, with that, I would like to go to president of one of our local banks, Greg Jones, who's a statewide bank as well. And Mr. Bass, if he would come forward as well. I know you didn't raise your hand, but I thought this would be more productive. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to see you here in front of Senate Judiciary Committee. If you could please introduce yourself one by one and who you're with and provide us some comments on the bill.
Tip my, there we go. Thank you, Chairwoman Nethercott and members of the committee. My name is Greg Jones. I am the EVP and one of the founders of Jonah Bank of Wyoming. I want to mention this. I am a lifetime hunter and owner of several weapons and am a supporter of the Second Amendment. But I am here adamantly to speak against this bill. My opposition to this bill goes to what I have always considered as an incontrovertible right of every Wyoming business to be able to philosophically choose to do business with any lawful industry my company decides to do business with. By passing this bill, the legislature, in my opinion, would now remove that right. And the camel's nose is very definitely has found its way under the tent, as they say. A precedent would be set that we have to ask, what's next? What's the next social agenda item that will be brought to the next session to limit our bank's ability to either choose to do business with that company or that industry or not? I asked myself, what if there's a legal, or a lawful pornographic business that comes before the legislature next year? Will we be required to do business with that industry? How about drug paraphernalia dealers, lawful drug paraphernalia dealers? Same question. And what about our counterparts? Those non-Wyoming chartered banks who will be held to a different standard now, if this bill passes, than what we will be held to. They will not be subject to this same legislation, and they have already, in some cases, shown through white papers that they have social agenda philosophies that they choose to not do business with, with industries that they choose not to do business with. This is a dual standard that we will be held to throughout eternity. And it's really unfair to those Wyoming community banks that support the Second Amendment. We have no disagreement with the firearms industry, but we have a vast disagreement with being held to a different standard. And it makes for competitive disadvantages in our industry. Let me give you an example. We'll be held to respond to this legislation through ensuring that we comply with the laws of the state, this particular law. That means we need to set up an audit platform and a compliance platform that will ensure that we are not providing disparaging treatment to this industry. We'll be responding to any or a required effort by the state banking commissioner to ensure that we are complying. Large national banks will be held to no such standard. Anybody can sue anybody in this business, and there is a obvious possibility that a lawsuit could be brought against a bank for frivolous means. We'll still have to defend it. We'll still have to go through the expense and the time that it would take to defend ourselves. Large national banks will have no such requirement. So in my opinion, the question comes down to which philosophy the House or the Senate holds as its highest priority. Forcing a Wyoming state chartered community bank to do business with a particular industry, this one being centered around firearms, versus allowing our banks to make these heretofore legal decisions for themselves. Please don't take that right away from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Questions for Mr. Jones? All right, seeing none, Mr. Bass, if you'd introduce yourself and share with us your thoughts.
Thank you, Madam. Tom Bass, I am president of Wyoming Bank and Trust. We are a small bank here in Cheyenne, have another branch in Burns. We're about 250 million in total assets. We've got 102 years. We just celebrated our 100th 2 years ago. So we've been in banking in this county for over 100 years. In reviewing House Bill 236, it became apparent to me that the bill is targeting Wyoming state chartered banks, which are not involved in the incidents leading to this bill's inception. Some national banks have been making certain policies not to do business with certain industries, not local state chartered banks who will be affected by this bill. By enacting this bill, I can see, as Mr. Jones stated, some potential costs, audit costs, compliance cost, potential legal costs. And our bank primarily does commercial loans, construction loans, mortgage loans. We do not administer credit cards. I am proud to be a Wyoming banker. Over the last 12 months, our community banks have helped local businesses with PPP loans. We've been working early mornings, late nights. So, you know, I'm proud to be a Wyoming banker. One final thought, Mr. Larson at STAG, we would love to talk to you. Greg Jones and I would be happy to chat with you. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bass. Question, Senator French.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, I understand where you're coming from, both gentlemen. But what's your thoughts on, I'm sure you have a board of directors, each of you at your financial institutions. So what happens if the board leans toward a certain political affiliation that may not like the political affiliation of those that want to produce firearms, ammunition, that kind of thing? How would you deal with that? Is that a fair thing? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Mr. Jones, Mr. Bass, if you can. Couple of ideas for you to think about is the fiduciary duty the board of directors has to their shareholders.
In my opinion, Senator French, it's very much self-controlling in the state of Wyoming. If our depositors, if our customers don't accept the position that we would take, that our board would take on a particular industry, we're going to lose business. And we're going to lose it very quickly because Wyoming's a small state with a lot of people that have a lot of strong feelings about those types of industries. And so, whereas our larger counterparts may not necessarily be so concerned about what the people in Wyoming think, we sure do. Because if we take a stand that is opposite of what our customers do, we're not going to be in business very long.
I'd
Mr.
also
Bass?
like to chime in there. Mr. Jones and I are both on our boards, and it's a very competitive field, especially in Cheyenne. Quite a few banks go after deals, and we compete with them. So, as Mr. Jones stated, that's how we stay in business, making loans.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just a question. You mentioned it was going to cost you money. I guess, could you explain how that would happen under a set of circumstances that would lead you to expend money just by this bill, this becoming law?
Okay,
Sure.
Gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. As I mentioned before, regarding regulation and what how all of our banks, all the Wyoming community banks respond to the laws that they are held to. Generally, what is done is that they set up a platform of checklist items to ensure that there is compliance of that particular statute. And in order to do that, you have people and systems that are brought on to ensure compliance with the law. So what we would have at Jonah Bank would be audit personnel that would be charged with reviewing this specific statute on a regular basis. Depending on how onerous that is, and with a field as wide as being held to a particular standard that may involve what I would refer to as disparate treatment. It's a difficult one to just reach out and say, are we complying or not? There is a lot of work that would need to be done relative to ensuring that. And so that will cost us additional personnel time and additional software costs to monitor our loan applications, our deposit, those particular people that we would choose not to do business with, for example, for whatever reason, we check those to make sure that we're still complying with those laws. So there's that piece of it. Plus, again, in the event that it's speculative, but in the event that we were sued, we'd have obvious legal costs involved as well.
But having lawyers as customers is also good. Right,
It's
Mr.
very
Jones?
important.
All right. Mr. Bass?
Also, thank you. Training of loan officers, training of our compliance department, audit department, that would add additional costs.
Senator Kolb?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, have you foresee an issue? I mean, have you turned down people for this type of loan or banking services for this purpose, or the ammunition and all the items this bill is trying to address? Have you ever turned anybody down because of that?
We welcome them.
I think that
Just-
the testimony is that it is the audit cost associated with ensuring compliance is being met and being able to determine whether or not a loan application or a customer request is from a gun-related manufacturer or dealer, and being able to ensure that you don't have any exposure to risk associated with all of those potential business customers, what business they're in. It's the audit component, right?
Correct.
Senator Kolb?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, but once they set that procedure up in place, I mean, they'll test your books and test your loans with the audit procedures to see if you're in compliance or not. Then, they'll go from there if that happens. So I would agree there's probably going to be initial costs when you set it up, but once that's done, it seems like you'll have a procedure in place, and that'll be the normal procedure. So was my question at the end of this. Would it be more normal like everything else you do or not?
Mr. Jones, isn't it true that you can absorb these costs? That's the
Yes,
question.
we can pay for these costs. However, these are costs to the bank and they're ongoing. For example, what we would need to do is go through every loan that we turn down to ensure that there was no disparate treatment against those particular this particular industry. It would likely be done on an annual basis or 18-month cycle. That's how frequently we are examined. And so what we would set our audit schedule up to do is to trace back for the last 18 months to determine whether there have been declinations of loans or we've turned away depositors that were tethered to the industry. And then if they were, find out specifically why. So it's simply, at least for a community bank, a very manual process.
Mr. Jones, Mr. Bass, going to page 5, do you have a copy of the bill? Senator Driscoll, could you provide a copy of the bill? Yeah. I do want Taiwan right now. Gentlemen, if you could go to page 5 of the bill.
Mhm.
Lines 14 through 21, subparagraph B.
Senator, lines 14 through 21.
Correct.
Our copy starts.
What color is your bill? Representative Washit? Representative Washit, you hand them your bill? Give you a minute to study that section with Mr. Meyer. So this is the exemption section, which says that this section, and the section is referring to the prohibition for a bank to discriminate against a firearms entity. It says this section shall not apply to a financial institution that chooses not to provide services to a firearm entity for a legitimate business reason. Do you believe that audit costs could be a legitimate business reason? Mr. Jones?
Chairman, I believe that absolutely, this is where I refer back to disparate treatment, because if, let's just use an example. Let's say that I don't know, let's just say a gun manufacturer came in and applied to us for a loan. We would go through the financials, we would go through the history, the whole 9 yards that all banks use to determine creditworthiness. If the loan is turned down for a particular reason, having to do with cash flow of the business, a legitimate business reason, then this is the exemption would apply. However, everyone can take what a legitimate business reason is and turn that on its head by saying, well, you just allowed another company in another industry to you granted that loan, and the circumstances are very similar. So then you get into a situation where you have moved out of that legitimate business reason, at least from that other party's standpoint, and now we have to defend ourselves and it's just, maybe I'm not making myself clear, but it's not necessarily for audit, but it is for ensuring that there is not that disparate treatment that you potentially can be cited for when you have very similar circumstances, but you have a distinct enough one on one hand to not make that loan, yet the circumstances were similar. Am I making any sense here?
Yes, you are, Mr. Jones. Thank you. Mr. Meyer, would you like to speak to that?
Well, I'm not sure that just the audit cost, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, Scott Meyer with the Wyoming Bankers Association. I'm not sure just the actual audit cost would be considered a legitimate business purpose in there, but I guess going to your question that the legitimate business purpose can cover so much of a range of things of why a bank decides that it doesn't want to finance or bank a particular customer. And that can be from their creditworthiness to the bank's risk, to the bank's collateral, to the character of the person they're dealing with. In this world.
Mr. Meyer, think about it this way. Think about it from, it works against the bill sponsor. It's actually works against them. Let's say the bank wants to say, we're not going to work with any firearms entity. In fact, doing the exact opposite of what the bill intends by saying, we have a legitimate business reason for not providing service to any firearms entity.
Well,
and therefore we're protected from this act because we don't want to deal with it. Because we know that that's true, right? Because what this bill does is it's really a regulation bill, right? We're regulating banks. We're regulating private business. And what happens when that occurs? People try to get out of it.
Madam Chairwoman, I would represent to you that banks in general not as an industry, banks in general do make decisions like that. Because we've already seen a local bank here that has made a decision that they won't finance, bank, or anything else with the fossil fuel industry. That is their own business decision. I don't take it in this bill as that is the legitimate business reason for not doing a particular customer. But I do think that a policy decision like that could very well be something that would be considered. I don't see that in this bill as far as the legitimate business purpose.
All right. Any additional questions? Think about it. All right. Thank you. We'll keep you close by.
I do have a couple of comments, Madam
Yeah,
Chairwoman.
Mr.
if I
Meyer,
might.
please proceed.
With respect to, and I don't know exactly what has happened, obviously a Representative Swanitzer was not true and made me come over there right away. So he was not deferring to you.
I will speak to him.
Yes, please. With respect to the bill itself, I just want to point out that, and I don't know how much of this has been brought up, but not only does the banks have the Equal Credit Opportunity Act where they have to deal with, it's unlawful for them to make or discriminate against any applicant for race, color, religion, national origin, creed, all that. What it appears is that we're going to make now an additional line item in here for firearms or whatever else. And I understand Operation Choke Point and I understand where we're getting this. But if we're not only going to expand that, then understand and in a previous committee hearing, when we talked about a previous bill, I brought up to you folks the Community Reinvestment Act. What you may not know about that Community Reinvestment Act is that subject to the feds, they have to come back and explain all the loans that they have denied and why. So there is already two levels in there that have to be explained as to what is the policy and why is this happening and justify what you're doing. And so not only is it illegal to do certain things, but we're getting reviewed. The banks will get reviewed every time that they make it. There's a loan declined, and then the Community Reinvestment Act provides that they have to be audited for those as well. So you have to look at all those adverse actions and they have to justify why they're doing it. And it's not based on industries, based on each applicant. So once, not only do you have all this regulations going on there, my question really is, in my mind, is this, as I think Commissioner Albert Faulkner had made a comment to, this only applies to Wyoming banks, Wyoming chartered institutions. So is this really a problem with Wyoming chartered institutions? Because I would represent to you that in conversations with my members, there's not a bank in this state that would not consider banking in a firearms related industry. Doesn't mean that they'll automatically do it, but there's nobody in there that's going to say, no, we're not going to do that. So now my question is this really a question of whether the legislature can address this? And we do get into the issue whether it's constitutional or not.
Mr. Meyer, what are your thoughts about that?
I don't think it's constitutional because the basis of this bill, at least from the testimony that I heard earlier and over on the House side, was there were two instances where credit card companies were not willing to process their credit cards. These are not Wyoming banks. These are national credit card companies. So the answer is they can find another credit card company to process. And as I understood the testimony, well, yes, we can, but their fees are higher. Well, okay, that's the market. They determine their own risk. That has nothing to do with your Wyoming community banks. That's a credit card company. And I did reach out to the credit card company and I did get their policy. And their policy does say, we will not do business with anybody in the firearms related business. Well, that's that credit card company. And it's not located in Wyoming.
Which one is it?
Pardon me?
Which one is it?
What do I have to say?
Yeah.
Well, then Citibank.
All right.
It's not what's in your wallet.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. But that is a company that doesn't have a bank here. And yet you can use the Citibank card if you want. And that won't stop you, but it does stop them, people from you. They won't run their business on this industry. Well, and unfortunately, they didn't call me and ask me what my opinion was on that. I would have given it to them. But
Mr.
they
Meyer,
made their own decision on what they're doing.
my constitutional concerns with the bill I mentioned last week had to do with the unequal treatment associated with state banks versus out of state, the national banks, out of state banks. Do you have any concerns about that?
Well, all I can tell you right now, Chairman Nethercott, is that the bill only addresses Wyoming community banks, and you're not finding any Wyoming community banks that are chartered here in Wyoming that are doing this. So I don't know that this is going to do anything, and passing a law in Wyoming is not going to affect a bank that's headquartered in South Dakota or Delaware, because that's a national bank and we can't regulate interstate commerce that way.
All right.
And I will tell you honestly, when I look at this thing, it appears, and I heard this on the House floor, that this is more for optics. And if it is for optics, then that's fine. But if this bill is designed for something other than what it says on its face, on how we're dealing with this thing, then I want to make the point that your Wyoming community banks who are out there helping your towns, your counties, and your state and doing really should not be an avenue for any political agenda. We are not here on a political side. We are only here out to help our members, the people of the state of Wyoming on community banking.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Questions for Mr. Meyer? All right, seeing none, appreciate your time. Further public comment on this bill? If you're thinking about providing public comment, please raise your hand. Anyone else? Raise your hand high. Mr. Odekoven, you're it. Come on up, come on down.
Madam Chair, Byron Odekoven, Executive Director for the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police, rising with a little discussion on the bill and in support of the bill from the standpoint of several of our members as officers possess federal firearms licenses and assist agencies and their fellow officers in the sale and firearms industry, if you will, by providing that service. Many of them go on to start a small business and operate that small business within Wyoming or grow in other states as well. So the act of securing financing is of concern to many of my members as officers as they think about that second job, that second career that may transform into that first career, if you will, or next career path and move as they seek to provide for their families. So in the House, I presented quite a bit of testimony in terms of the Second Amendment and our support of the Second Amendment as it relates to the bill and in general from the sheriffs and chiefs. I sense your time restriction is a little tight today, being the last day for the committee, and thus don't want to belabor the point. Suffice it to say that the sheriffs and chiefs stand strong on the Second Amendment and the rights of people to conduct in the firearm industry. Many of our folks engage in that and look to the banking industry proper support as they go about conducting their business. So Madam Chair, with that.
Thank you, Mr. Odekoven. Questions for Mr. Odekoven? So Last Cop stands in favor of the bill.
Madam Chair, we do.
Thank you, Mr. Odekoven. Appreciate your time. With that, Mr. Lisi, you could start your video.
My name is Jeff Lacey. I am apparently having trouble with my video. I'm a small firearms manufacturer in Cody, Wyoming. Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me an opportunity to speak. We are an example of exactly what was discussed over the national banks. We had our credit card processing shut down without notice. The only reason we found out is when we actually notified them of the problem, they told us that they were no longer doing business with the firearms industry. And as such, we went through the process that was discussed of finding another credit card processing company. Cost us substantially more in fees. We, at that point, got our business back up and going, but the timing was not good because it was right in the middle of a trade show that we happened to be working. And so we had to basically do everything on paper for a period of time while we had our folks in the office trying to reestablish business. Very inconvenient, of course, as you can imagine, but we dealt with it. The other thing that I would like to mention is this is not just a banking issue. We have had the exact same issues with insurance companies. Over the last couple of years, we've had to completely change our insurance carriers twice based on the fact of companies that have decided that they no longer want to support the firearms industry due to the unknown liabilities and or laws that may be passed negating the liability or the exemption from liabilities for firearm manufacturers. So this is more than just banking, but is very much banking. And we would love to have a company in Wyoming that wants to process credit cards, or we would love to have an insurance company that actually wants to support our industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate hearing from you. Any questions for Mr. Lacey? All right, seeing none. Thanks for doing business in Wyoming. I hope you bank locally. All right. Majority Floor Leader Driscoll, I see that you're here and you're a co-sponsor on the bill. Do you have any comments? All right, thank you. Any final public comments on the bill? Representative Washut, you'd like to defer to Mr. Cole? I understood the governor's office wanted to provide testimony on the bill. Is that true, or have they had another engagement by the time the meeting ended? It appears maybe they had another engagement.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, yes. So Mr. Budd was here to indicate support, and I think he's mentioned something to do with a veto that he had to go take care of. He said he would be following up with you after.
Not this bill?
No, not this one.
After he heard from the local bankers?
We like this one. But I'm sure that he will be visiting with you after this committee meeting, and thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cole. Representative Washut.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few comments in response to the testimony we've heard. And we heard about the costs to the Wyoming state banks, and we recognize that, but there are also costs to our firearms businesses. And so we all have to live in a world not of our making, and these overtures from outside our borders that are making banking and credit card businesses more challenging for our industries here in Wyoming are things we have to attend to. And when I think about this bill and what its importance is it's more than optics. It's a practical reality. All of our Wyoming banking regulations only apply to Wyoming banks, right? So what's true
Representative
about
Washut, are you punishing the good actors?
what's true about this bill will be true about all the other of our banking regulations. And so I think that what we're doing with this bill is a step in the right direction. We're showing support for our industry. And we also saw a comment about, or heard a comment about the camel's nose under the tent. And unlike a camel in a tent, the state legislature has the power to determine whether that camel comes under the tent in the future, right? And how much of the nose we allow under the tent. And so this camel relates to a constitutional issue, the Second Amendment, the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 24 of the Wyoming Constitution. And so it's different than some of the other industries that were brought forth during testimony. This is a constitutional field of endeavor to commerce and legal firearms. And so if other industries come to us next year and say, well, what about us? Can we have some protection as well? That's up to us to decide. We're not, bystanders to watch the camel climb under the tent without any recourse. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Questions for the representative? Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just after listening to all this, I'm a little bit more confused than I started off being. Thought it was simple, and I support everything I think you're trying to intend to do, but I haven't heard an instance where it's happened to anybody. Can you name any place in the state of Wyoming where somebody was turned down? I guess that was kind of missing from information. I think that we're trying to do everything we can do.
It's a gun bill, Senator Kolb. None of it's happening, but we're doing it.
Oh, well,
Representative Washut?
In the House side, we did hear testimony from 2 Wyoming businesses that had been directly affected by denials of services from financial institutions. I can't tell you for sure whether those were state community banks, but they were Wyoming businesses that did suffer because of this growing trend to not financially support the firearms industry, not because of their financials, but purely because they're involved in the commerce of firearms. And I think Mr. Cole can add to that.
Mr. Cole?
Chair Nethercott, members of the committee. So I
That's
would,
a good sigh.
well, I would answer yes. The answer is yes. So the banks that are here today are testifying that Wyoming banks have not begun doing this yet. They haven't been asked to do this. They haven't been pressured to do this. We agree. They mentioned that their boards of directors, have not, made them do that. Our companies in the state have had this happen to them. So from national banks and they're from credit card processors, we have many, many examples. Some of the folks that testified in the previous committee meeting can, talk about how, but again, a lot of this relates to a regulatory pressure that came from a federal regulator who put pressure on banks to change the designation of our industry into a high-risk industry that then got baked into the system. And now we are treated as such by national banks and by credit card processors. I would say we are not the pornography industry, as was insinuated earlier. We are not drug paraphernalia industry. We are an industry that makes items that are constitutionally protected, that are only purchased by people who are legally able to do so, protected federally. We have federal laws such as the Protection of the Lawful Commerce and Arms Act to preclude us from frivolous lawsuits. We are not a bad business deal. The only reason that this is happening, and this is not refuted by anyone here, is because we are firearms companies. The same arguments that were made today are being made literally by Giffords, an anti-gun group, who is saying you should be able to keep doing this. And the reason they are doing it is because they have every intention of doing this at every financial institution, because the goal is to starve us of a place in the economy. And we recognize that this is not something, and again, this bill does not, in our mind, does not apply just to local banks. We understand that they're looking at the regulatory piece in the first part and how that relates to the banking commission. We believe that the bigger piece of this bill, probably the most important part for our industry, is the recognition that the state of Wyoming will not do business with a bank, and it does not specify the charter, whether it's state or national, that discriminates against the firearms industry. So with that, I would just simply note also that some of these processes that we've talked about, these additional processes for banks, they're doing this already. They're going through these processes. It is illegal in the state of Wyoming to discriminate. It is illegal to discriminate against people with disabilities. And for example, under current law, you cannot refuse to do business with a person with a disability. So you are doing the same analysis. You can still deny people these loans, and they do, to people with disabilities all the time. It's permissible as long as it's based on a legitimate business reason. It's happening today. Frivolous lawsuits could result from this. Yes, they result from disabilities as well. So we believe that mechanisms are in place. This is not a new business process for our banks.
All right, with that, I'm going to close public comment. Thank you, gentlemen. Back to the committee. Moved by Senator Cost. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator French. Are there amendments? Senator Cost has an amendment. We're going to deal with the amendment that was prepared by the stakeholders.
Madam Chair, to amend with the previous amendment that was given on page 3, line 2, we would strike out means any person. On line 3, 4, and 5, strike out all the way to bank. And then it would read financial institution, which is on line 2 currently. And then the amendment would read means a financial institution as defined in Wyoming statute 13-1-101A and then XI. I'm sorry, IX. I'll try to read that correctly.
You're just referencing the federal code for the definition of financial institutions.
Yes.
Okay.
And then payment processor or is left alone. National Banking Association as defined in 12 US Code 221.
Does everyone have the amendment?
I sent it to. And then a semicolon. And then down on page 6,
You share it with him.
line 17, strikes out regulator and inserts the state banking commissioner or bank supervisory agency as defined in Wyoming statute 13-2-802A3I, period. And the rest of it's the same.
Is that
I
it?
did send that to her, and that would be it.
This is the amendment that was done between the stakeholders and the banking commissioner. Do I have a second on the motion? Seconded by Senator French. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion has passed. Any additional amendments?
Question.
I'm going to work this bill on committee of the whole. Question being called on the bill. Roll call, Judy.
Senator Cooper? Is he
Excused.
Senator French?
Aye.
Senator Kolb?
Aye.
Senator Cost?
Aye.
Chairman Nethercott?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, HB 236 passes with 4 ayes, 1 excused.
And Judy, I've left that vote open for Senator Cooper,
Okay.
and I'll give you his votes. Thank you, gentlemen. Remember that sword cuts both ways. With that, Representative Bear, thank you for being here. We're moving on to House Bill 210, minor sex traffic victims liability. We are at 120. We go back in at 2. So do you have folks who want to speak to this bill, Representative?
Madam Chairwoman, there are some people here who want to speak on the bill.
Okay.
And there may be some online as well. I've asked for some testimony online as well. But I just want to briefly share some information about the bill prior to that.
If you're in the waiting room, if you can please raise your hand if you intend to speak on this bill, even if you're just thinking about it. All right. And if you're in the room and you are thinking about speaking on this bill, if you could raise your hand. Ms. Chambers, do you intend to speak on this bill? No, you don't need to come forward now. I'm just trying to get a sense of the time. Okay. I have 5 people who want to speak on the bill, and we have another bill to get to. Representative Bear, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And that conversation was not lost on me. I will be very brief. Just want to give you a little bit of history about how this bill came about. I have been pretty outspoken on this particular issue of human sex trafficking. And I reached out to a particular organization in Sheridan who advocates for victims. And through several conversations with them and a couple of senators, they provided some model legislation that the state of Wyoming didn't have exactly the same kind of legislation that we see in 31 other states, as well as federal legislation. And over the months since then, I've been working on that particular legislation to bring what I bring today. Now, we had some fairly good legislation, I felt, when we presented to your counterparts in the House, but there were some concerns in that body And so an amendment was brought that added a particular item, which is a rebuttable presumption. And the idea there was that we wanted to ensure that this particular legislation didn't mislead the public to believe that we were legalizing prostitution for minors. I argued that minors are still victims, even when they do act out of line because of the undeveloped nature of their minds. But that particular amendment was critical in getting the bill through the House. So you're going to hear testimony today where that particular amendment takes basically what that group that brought the model legislation to me, it's going to hurt what they're trying to accomplish. I sent each of you a testimony from that group, as well as a brochure that kind of explained exactly what this bill is doing. And it really had to do with giving protections to these minors when there's not a third party, in other words, a pimp in the situation. Because what we're trying to address is when a young person maybe runs away from home, and then another person who has financial means to support them and help them comes along and exchanges services for the help that they provide. And we feel that that person is guilty of coercing a minor into an act that is illegal. We want to protect those minors from prosecution. This bill does that. Current statute and practice of law and our law enforcement does do that as well. But we want to put it, codify it, make it very clear. And this bill also provides direct protection from DFS with chins for those who their parents are either involved or not involved with the process. So with that, I have concerns about the amendment that we brought in the House. I do believe that the rebuttable presumption still allows the bill to be effective, but I'm not an attorney. I slept in a very nice hotel, but I'm still not an attorney. So I'm going to leave that to this good body's determination of whether that particular amendment should stay or leave. I do have concerns that if it does go back to the House without the amendment, whether or not it would pass on concurrence. But again, I will leave that up to you. And basically what we're trying to get at is what you see on page 2 and page 3. These are the items where we're protecting minors and we're providing for those chins protections or assistance. And with that, I'll open it up for questions to me or to follow on comments from the public.
Questions for Representative Bear? Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, so are you still wanting to advance the bill even though there's an amendment on it out of the House that you disagree with?
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Senator French. I do want to advance the bill because I do believe the rebuttable presumption does not take the effectiveness of the bill away. I've heard testimony that that's not true. Again, I'm not an attorney, so that's, my motivation is to try to provide something for this area. And I've given you the history as to why I went about that.
Don't have time.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative Bear. Any additional questions for the representative? All right. With that, we're going to go to Ms. Schmidt from the Director of the Department of Family Services. Ms. Schmidt. Representative Bear, we'll come back around to you, okay?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Corinne Schmidt, and I'm the Director of the Department of Family Services. We're just here to answer any questions since it does pull in statutes for which we're responsible when children come into care. So only here for questions if there are any.
All right, thanks, Ms. Schmidt. Any questions for Ms. Schmidt? Seeing none. I'm going to need people to provide some hard public comment on this. I know no one wants to provide an opinion on it, but I think it'd be helpful to the committee in making these determinations. Ms. Chambers? Okay, Ms. Simmons, 2 minutes. And you are timed.
Gail Simmons, Sheridan County. I've been working with Uprising, which is the organization in Sheridan. I want to point out that the amendments that were put in, absolutely switch out the whole purpose of what I understand the bill to be, which is that when minors are arrested or brought into the system, that in fact, they do not get charged with prostitution, that they get the services that they actually need. And so when you look at the engrossed bill, and I'm on page 2, lines 10 through 23, and 2 more. It specifically gives, I don't know what a rebuttably presumed means. I don't know what that means in legal language, but it actually says the exact opposite of what the purpose was, which is we don't want to have children that are in another part of the statute are identified as a child as one under the age of 18. Well, if they're under the age of 18, then why would you want to be able to charge them with prostitution, which is the 64101. So that amendment, which was put in to get this to pass, actually goes completely against the purpose of the bill. So I would encourage that you either strip out that amendment, which again negates the whole purpose of the legislation, or just kill the bill and let it be addressed by the task force, the state task force, and maybe provide the kind of detail that's needed. But that's, yeah, and I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons. Any questions for Ms. Simmons? Representative Bear, it appears that you brought that amendment.
Yeah, that was, sorry. Yes, Mr. Chairman, that was an effort to appease those who had voted no in the committee.
Okay.
And again, I'm not an attorney, so I was looking for a solution.
Sure. Okay. Understand. Thank you, Representative Bear. Senator Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you could explain, Representative, page 2, line 22, when it talks about only by establishing a reasonable doubt, because I had some questions about that, and what that really means when it comes to dealing with a situation that may not be so cut and dry. And so if you could please enlighten me.
Madam Chairman, you're being an attorney, you may be able to answer this better than I. LSO created that particular language as we inserted the rebuttal presumption.
Follow up.
Sure.
Reasonable doubt, I think, is a very high bar, beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think to prove that was, I think it's difficult. So there's other words it could have been used. That was my question about why that was necessary. I was hoping to understand it better. Thank you.
Again, my answer would be that the idea of the rebuttable presumption is to not take away the teeth of this particular bill and what it's trying to produce. And so having that high bar allows for that, so that if there is an instance where a prosecutor or a judge determines that there is a need to go outside of what this bill is trying to do, and that's protect minors, they have to meet that high bar to be able to do so.
All right. With that, we're going to go to Patrick Klein, Mr. Klein. And then we're going to go to Miss Markham. If either of you would start your videos.
This is Terry Markham, and mine is only giving me an option to unmute. There is no option to start a video.
Okay, that's fine. If you would just introduce yourself again, we're really short on time. We have another bill to get to. So you're limited to 2 minutes, and for that I apologize, but it's just kind of the burden we're in on this, the last day of the session to work these bills. So Ms. Markham, 2 minutes, if you'd introduce yourself to the committee.
Yes, I'm Terry Markham. I'm the executive director for Uprising. So we were consulted on this bill. We actually worked with an agency called Shared Hope International That is sort of the national agency within the human trafficking field that advises on policy across the US. One of the main things that we were trying to accomplish with this bill was to help the Wyoming statute more closely mirror the federal statute. And a big part of that was clarifying language regarding third party. So oftentimes trafficking victims, if they are engaging in something what we call survival sex, they might be approached by a buyer directly. And therefore they might be engaging in commercial sex without a third party or a trafficker. A lot of times we also have victims who don't realize their victim status and don't disclose that they have a trafficker, or they have really strong trauma bonds with their trafficker, and they might, so to speak, take the fall for engaging in commercial sex. So that's what this bill was really trying to accomplish, was clarifying that any minor engaged in commercial sex is not old enough to consent to engaging in a commercial sex act, therefore they are automatically a victim. And also to clarify that minors engaging in commercial sex will not be prosecuted because we know that putting them through punitive systems often has poor outcomes and actually costs our state quite a bit. And getting them to services like Representative Bear mentioned is always a much better route, because they are a victim if they've engaged in commercial sex and they're under 18. And I'll stand for questions.
Ms. Markham, thank you. Thank you so much for acknowledging that 2-minute mark. Appreciate it. Questions for Ms. Markham? All right, seeing none, Ms. Markham, again, thank you so much for being here. Mr. Klein, I see you're out there. If you want to start your video, or maybe your video doesn't work, but if you would unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the committee.
My name is Patrick Klein. I'm the founder and director of Vision Beyond Borders based in Casper. We've been involved with rescuing women and children out of sex trafficking around the world for over 20 years. And what we have found is a lot of these girls, especially that have been trafficked at a young age, their bodies physically grow, but emotionally they stop growing. And so I think it's important that we protect the rights of these people that are trafficked, especially those are minors, because they cannot defend themselves. This is all they know. They emotionally have stopped once they started being trafficked. And I just think we need to do all we can to protect them. We've been working all over the world, and it's growing, and I see it even happening in Wyoming more and more. And I think we need to do everything we can.
All right, thank you, Mr. Klein. Any questions for Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein, appreciate hearing from you and your work in this state. So thank you so much. All right, with that, public comments closed online. Is there anyone left in the room? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed on this bill. Representative Bear, just to very briefly, you're killing Representative Provenza's time.
Yes, and I don't want to do that. I just wanted to point out that we still have that third party issue being addressed on page 2 in lines 19 and 20.
All right. Thank you, Representative. Appreciate it. All right, public comment is closed. Committee, back to you. Moved by Senator French. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Cost. Amendments to the bill? Senator Kolb?
Yeah, I make an amendment that on page 2, line 22, a reasonable doubt be struck and replace it with a preponderance of evidence.
Is there a second? Seeing none, that motion has failed. Any additional amendments? Question being called, roll call vote on the bill.
Senator Cooper left a no vote, absentee. Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Cole.
No.
Senator Cost.
No.
Chairman Nethercott.
No.
Madam Chairman, House Bill 210 engrossed fails. Fails by 4 noes and 1 aye.
Thank you, Judy. 8 more months, Representative Bear. We'll see it again. Okay. Welcome, Representative Provenza.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman, and nice to see you again today. Thank you for being cognizant of time and fitting me in last for Senate Judiciary. Today I bring to you House Bill 247, Law Enforcement Hiring Practices. I do want to make a quick note before I go into this bill. There was a printing error that I noticed today. I thought page 2 was just cut out entirely. So I'm not sure if you have that same printing error, but I did earlier. So this bill comes to the committee today after working with various agencies, primarily with the Peace Officer Standards and Training Office, through investigations of serious misconduct of law enforcement officers. Unfortunately, currently that office is not able to obtain all of the records that they would need to thoroughly investigate that any cases of serious misconduct. And I'll let them speak to that further as they're here to testify online. But what this bill does, while its main focus seems to be on bad apples or law enforcement that has engaged in misconduct, it's really trying to support the sanctity of law enforcement as a whole, support good officers, support the public's trust in law enforcement. And while we can't write statutes to give a big hurrah, we can ensure that we take care of good officers. And this becomes important just because we often see that officers that have engaged in serious misconduct or have a history of misconduct tend to further propagate that misconduct, and they oftentimes are the basis of most of the complaints filed in an agency. So you have a small percentage of officers who are really kind of pushing problems within an agency. The other thing that this statute would do is it would house records under the Peace Officer Standards and Training Office for serious misconduct, allowing for smaller agencies to perhaps access those if someone's trying to look for employment. We would have a better idea of who hasn't been fired previously for serious misconduct. And so it just kind of stops the pattern from happening. But currently state statute doesn't necessarily allow for post to be able to access those records. Just real briefly through the bill, you'll find on page 2, we have appropriate sideboards, notwithstanding any provision of law on line 2. We added an amendment in the House side for if an officer resigns during an investigation, then post completes and makes a determination. That way, if they leave, we're not just immediately accidentally decertifying them or making an assumption on that. So we're trying to protect officers who might leave because there's a complaint and they don't want to have to deal with it. I'm sure it's a frustrating process. So it commands the commission to complete that investigation. Additionally, then on lines 6 through 9 on page 3, we have the appropriate safeguards for due process under the Office of Administrative Hiring. This is the Wyoming Administrative Procedures Act. And then lines 11 through 18 is that second part of making sure that those records, so any employing agency who finishes an investigation, finds that misconduct has occurred, submits that information to post to store that documentation for access, and post then completes that investigation. On lines 3 or page 3, lines 22 into line 5 on page 4, we're defining misconduct, serious misconduct specifically. And then we have the appropriate dates for when this would be effective in sections 2 and 3 on the ends of page 4. For that, I will stand for any questions, and I will say I probably will have, you might have better luck with some questions from post if you want to bring Director Walsh on.
Thank you, Representative Provenza. Any questions for the representative? All right, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, good day or good afternoon, I suppose, at this point. What was the reason why you brought this bill? I mean, what started this? What was the seed of this issue? Could you help me out with that? And also, Explain what you're trying to get to by determination. By what other state? I mean, how are you trying to use that into quantifying, I guess, an issue with under definition? Lost my place here. Under serious misconduct.
Representative, I think if you could answer the first question, Senator Kolb, if you could, I didn't understand your second question either. I don't think the representative did. If you could narrow that down, and Representative, if you could answer the first question, which is why the bill?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Senator Kolb, for your question. This particularly comes from my community, in which we have a specific officer in the Albany County Sheriff's Office who has now used fatal force on 3 separate people. He's also been terminated from previous position for assaulting a person with a video camera. That he was fired, sued for that, and despite that was able to get a job in our office. So in that there's an inability to get some records that came mostly from out of state. We also had another officer that, these are just my direct connections, who was arrested for, I believe, domestic violence. And I had alerted Post of this arrest. My understanding is that they hadn't otherwise been alerted of this arrest. And that officer's, I believe, under investigation. So it's some agencies talk with Post and work with them on these issues. Some agencies maybe don't. The other thing that I have direct contact with is in terms of record keeping and why we want to keep these records in the Albany County Sheriff's Office policy manual from the previous sheriff. So you heard from Sheriff Applehands today. He's new, but prior to him, the policy manual on page 26 said that disciplinary records specifically, could be shredded if you put in a request after 1 year and the supervisor approved. So we have a problem with having your disciplinary record shredded. How can we track that into the next employer? We don't have a uniform policy across the state of Wyoming. So trying to identify ways to perhaps make it more uniform and accessible to the people that have to make decisions about certifications.
Follow up, Senator Kolb.
Clarification on my second question. Line page 2, which is really says 3 on the bottom of yours, line 22. Under serious misconduct, the definition, it says means improper. Can you expound on that and explain where does the meaning at, and what does it mean to you? Thank you.
Representative Provenza, do you think improper is too ambiguous?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Senator Kolb. In making this definition of what is serious misconduct and improper, there needed to be some room for so that we weren't eliminating people that maybe should have been cast by our net. I certainly can understand that the definition might leave some room for you want more. There's not a ton of state statutes that do define what serious misconduct is. So this was what LSO and I came up with. I would leave it to the committee. If you think that we need to be more specific in that definition, or we need to change it in some way, I would follow the committee's recommendation on that in developing perhaps a better definition.
All right, any additional questions for the representative? Senator French?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative. The officer you mentioned in your community, was there I guess it's kind of a 2-part question. Was there a court trial, and was the individual found guilty or acquitted?
Representative?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Senator French. That specific officer was within a grand jury, and he was not indicted. However, there is civil litigation right now of the upwards of $20 million for a wrongful death lawsuit.
Senator French?
So thank you, Madam Chair. So the grand jury did not file charges against that officer, correct?
Representative?
Madam Chairwoman, Senator French, that is correct. Although the facts of the grand jury is also under consideration of that lawsuit. There's concerns that how that was handled was improper.
All right, any additional questions? Seeing none, let's go to Director Walsh, Chairman Walsh, Chris Walsh from Post.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are you able to hear me?
We are able to hear you. There seems to be a theme for this meeting, Zoom meeting, where the video doesn't work, but we can hear you. So if you can introduce yourself to the committee, if your video doesn't work, and share with us your thoughts on the bill. Oh, we can see you.
All right, I was surprised. It looked like it all just shut off to me.
Nope, we can see you. So yeah, introduce yourself to the committee and share with us your thoughts on the bill.
Madam Chairman, I'm Chris Walsh. I'm the Executive Director of the Peace Officer Standard and Training Commission. We basically have two roles, and that is certification and validation of training, both basic training and ongoing training for all certified individuals in the state, and then also decertification investigations in brief format. So I'm willing to answer any questions about processes or any of the methods that we go through on investigations that might help.
Mr. Walsh, we would love to hear that. We just don't have the time. We gavel back in at 2 o'clock, and so we're on a very short time frame here, and that's unfortunate. Can you take a position on the bill? Are you for it or against it?
Madam Chair, we run into that lobbying for or against. I'm going to tell you that I believe that we're able to meet everything that the bill is proposing. I know there's been some discussion about caseload, and I do the investigations. So is there enough time in my day to do that? And I can't answer the question. We don't know what we don't know. I am a retired police chief, and I know that I would have officers leave employment in lieu of being terminated. And, the debate would be an investigation that I would carry on that an agency had stopped. In my experience, our investigations were done long before we brought the officer to a termination level. So I'm certainly able to maintain the records. I'm able to maintain the roster, if you will, on individuals that have failed to meet the standards of this bill. And I just don't know the volume of additional investigations. And I suspect if that were to be a problem, I would be able to come forward at a later point with some objective data on why I needed more resources.
They ask for money, always.
There's always asking for money. I'm not asking for any right now. I just don't know.
All right, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any questions for Mr. Walsh? All right, seeing none. Lieutenant Colonel Ratliff, I see that you're with us. So did you want to provide some comments on the bill? Your video may not work, but if you could start yep, we can see you too. Wonderful. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself to the committee. We're glad to see you again.
And good to see you, Madam Chair, and thank you. I'll be quick. Shannon Ratliff with the Highway Patrol. We're neither for nor against the bill, but if I may, I'm just going to offer a couple of quick comments and concerns. The patrol has a very thorough and robust hiring and disciplinary process, as do, to my knowledge, all of the law enforcement agencies in this state. Our testing and evaluation process as we consider candidates for potential hire includes several interviews, a thorough look at the applicant's job, financial background, several other checks. We travel to the applicant's home community. Sometimes that includes traveling out of state. So sometimes at significant cost to our agency. We present a battery of test evaluations that include a psychological evaluation, truthfulness or deception tests, other checks. Given our world today, we are laser focused on who we want to hire and who we do not want to hire. We are a state agency, so of course we subscribe to the state personnel rules, which includes progressive discipline, In other words, unless the infraction is fairly egregious, you're not going to be fired the first time you do something wrong. You will, however, still be accountable for that transgression. All of our disciplinary decisions are examined thoroughly by, of course, because of our structure, by the YDOT Human Resources, E&I Human Resources, and ultimately the Attorney General's Office. It is fair, however, that we recognize as a state law enforcement entity that disciplinary issues simply cannot be allowed to continue, as that would put us in an indefensible position as it relates to negligent retention. We have a professional standards and conduct division who complete all of our administrative investigations. They're crazy busy. I can't imagine that Post won't be, considering all the number of agencies and officers in the state. If an officer has done something to warrant decertification after having been terminated, we're the first to seek that decertification through the post-commission process. We don't want bad apples traveling anywhere either. Certainly not our bad apples. I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair, and answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Any questions? All right, seeing none, appreciate hearing from you. Mr. Odekoven, I would imagine you have some comments here. That is all the folks up in Zoom.
Madam Chair, Byron Odekoven, the Executive Director for the Wyoming Sheriffs and Chiefs. Let me cover quickly a couple of points. I know we're up against the clock a little bit, so I'll forego some of what I would consider the normal testimony that I would provide on a bill like this and hit a couple of the highlights for a couple of specific points. And I appreciate the Lieutenant Colonel's comments on progressive discipline, negligent hiring, negligent retention, and the disciplinary process, because I think that's part of what's at the heart of the bill, and visiting with a good sponsor early in support of the concept of having those standards reviewed and having them in place as the bill was initially being drafted. I think part of what may be of interest is the discussion started on an officer from out of state. And that is one of the issues that we wrestle with in Wyoming quite a bit, is how do we deal with that background check and those records? And as the good Lieutenant Colonel pointed out, some of us end up having to travel out of state or taking that as a duty to do just that, but not everybody's able to do that. There's a national organization that's actually being funded from a BJA grant called IADLST, and I wish I could remember exactly what IADELST stands for, besides the International Association of Academy Directors, as they look at, and they maintain the roster, if you will, of decertified, terminated, or otherwise misconduct-related officers nationally. And Wyoming participates in it. And we regularly, routinely look to that as part of our process for hirings. Likewise, we're also duty-bound to share our information with other chiefs. In fact, we're actually exempt from liability should we share with hiring chiefs and sheriffs or the patrol, other law enforcement agencies, any disciplinary matters. That is not the case for civilian employees, nor would it be the case for other style employers. But it's important enough and recognized nationally and within the state that we do just that, share those disciplinary interviews with our fellow administrators throughout the hiring process. In fact, as I say, we're one exempt, and two, federally, there's even a statute that indicates we're required to share that information. We can't withhold that information. So in part, what the bill attempts to discuss is probably, or at least on its surface, has more to do with some lack of proper administration. Maybe not so much robust hiring processes or HR processes in the works. And I'm not 100% sure how we quite fix that, especially in light of the amendment that the House added to the bill at the final hours to kind of help shepherd the bill through the House. So supporting the concept, I think there is enough confusion on the issue that it may warrant some interim discussion as to the hiring practices, retention, discipline, et cetera, as it relates to the rest of the state. We've heard of the issue locally, so to speak, But I'm happy to report the rest of the state doesn't seem to have this level of issues coming to their forefront in their communities as well. So, Madam Chair, I think, let me take a quick look. One other point, Post. We work well with Post. I served as a Post commissioner for 2 terms under a previous governor, where we did those reviews of discipline, those reviews of decertifications, conducted those hearings. I can tell you the Post Commission takes their job very seriously, as does Director Walsh, and he would be a great resource in that interim as we discuss the issue more fully. Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Odekoven. Questions for Mr. Odekoven? All right, seeing none. Public comments closed. Committee, back to you.
Madam Chair,
Senator Cooper.
I have a question on procedure. Having been absent due to another committee meeting and not heard the arguments one side or the other, out of fairness to the bill and to sponsors, am I allowed to not vote, or is my vote required?
Your vote is not required. We can mark you as excused. All right,
Okay,
all right,
thank you.
all right. So the 4 remaining committee members, is there a motion on the bill? Moved by Senator Cost. Is there a second? All right, seeing none, that bill has failed. Representative Provenza, I want you to know we appreciate your efforts, and the same with Representative Bear. I know it's hard, but know that these conversations will continue to move forward. Thank you.